everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Suzy and I've been reading. Today I'm bringing you my July wrap up. So you remember how last month when I said I usually read between sort of like 10-12 books a month? Yeah. So in July I only managed to read about 6 books. Now that is a decent innings for a month's reading by all accounts. I mean, I went through a stage of my life where I read maybe 6 books in about 6 years, so I'm not too mad about it. But the truth is that number is a little bit low for me these days, and I felt like a distinct lack of stories deep within my soul this month. That's probably a little bit dramatic, but you know what I mean. I'm not sure what happened last month that limited my reading in such a way, but I can tell you that today is the 6th of August and I have already finished 2 books this month, so it looks like we are back on the up. One of the benefits of having read a little bit less last month though is that this wrap up ought to be a shit ton shorter. You're welcome. As before with my wrap ups, I'll be grouping the books I read into genre so you guys can just go ahead and dip into the bits that interest you the most. And because I am a creature of habit, let's just kick it off with fantasy again first.
I said, hold up, wait a minute, something ain't right.
Hello everyone, it's me, editing Suze. I am interrupting your regular scheduled programming today to bring you an apology and an explanation. So it's nothing that serious really when we think about it, but there is some background noise on a couple of the reviews in this wrap up. It lasts for about a minute in the middle of the review for the Poppy War, which you're about to see, and it shows up again in another review towards the very end. I did my best to get rid of it, but I'm still a novice. If you know how, please let me know. I got so lost in a YouTube hole. I think I'm still in there. Basically, I'm not sure what caused it, but my microphone picked up some crackling as I was going through the review. I didn't notice until it came to this point in time. I did try to refilm it, but it just felt really fake and inauthentic, and I mean, that's not me, so... Turns out this was the lesser of all the evils, and I really hope it doesn't put you off. Please feel free to skip through it if it makes your brain itch a bit like it does mine, but hopefully it's not as bad as I fear, and this is just me being a bit paranoid. I suspect it's not though, so what are you going to do? One of them things. I'll let you get back to the reviews, but thank you for, thank you for your understanding. Only one fantasy to report this month, but oh boy is it a good one. This is The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. The Poppy War is book 1 in a hugely popular high fantasy trilogy which is inspired by Chinese history. It has a primarily military focus and a wide-ranging storyline that is full of political intrigue and a magic system that is fueled by the power of gods. The story follows Rin, a war orphan who is raised in relative poverty by opium smugglers. Rin pushes hard and gets into the elite military training academy Synagogue. Whilst there, she picks a few fights, she passes a few tests, and she ends up studying the obscure subject of law. It's then that Rin realises that she can invoke the power of a god, so it turns out that she, unlike me, chose her options pretty well. I guess my mum was right, I really never have used GCSE drama ever since. Anyway, war arrives and Rin is thrown into the melee. Shit then happens. She finds out a lot about herself along the way, but mostly Rin finds out just how far she's willing to go for vengeance. This was awesome. I knew it was popular, but popular doesn't always mean good. I'm looking at you, Witcher series. But I am so pleased to be able to say that this book is well worth the hype. Rin is a brilliantly complex character already in book 1. Typically, I find that first books don't tend to explore all the many facets of a character because, frankly, there's just too much exposition and setup to be doing. But Kuang was savvy, basing this very firmly in real-world military history because it meant that she could focus more of her time and energy on developing her characters and her plotline. Still, that takes nothing away from Kuang's world-building skills as a whole. I was so impressed by how immediate and seamless the world-building in this really was. So I listened to this on audio. Now, typically, I don't like to listen to the first book in a fantasy series, especially on audio, because I can find it really confusing. I much prefer to physically read them so that I can keep tabs on what's going on with all of the world building and the plot setup and the characters. But this was so well done, it wasn't an issue, and I was immediately captured by the world and the story. It felt fantastical, but it felt familiar, and I couldn't have asked for more. I also really loved the central relationship in this one between Rin and Jiang. It's that classic old school traditional fantasy mentor-mentee dynamic. Which leads me to mention that there are a few tropes in this one, but truthfully nothing felt tired. I think it's the fact that Rin isn't always a particularly likeable character, which really helped in this respect. You know, unlike most MCs at the beginning of traditional high fantasy series that are quite naive and, you know, super sweet and very idealistic, I mean, Rin wasn't any of those things. That really helped keep it quite fresh. If you're sitting there thinking, oh, that sounds alright, but military-focused fantasy? Like, it sounds dry and boring as hell, mate. This will blow your socks off. It is full of action and intrigue and a twisting plotline that had me right on the edge. Like, trust me when I say that this ain't boring in the least. Kuang does not hold back either. She doesn't sugarcoat these acts of war, nor the moral or psychological implications of some of the massive life and death decisions that are being made in this. I also really liked how Kuang exposed the story to other real world issues as well. Things like mental health conditions, sexism, racism, elitism, addiction. I mean, these things weren't just missing because this was a fantasy story and Kuang didn't have to include them. They were there, and I really appreciated that. Now, an unexpected bonus of this one was the understated sense of humour in there, especially from Zhang's character. Now, I thought that this really added a bit more flavour to the story, and it really helped balance the light and shade of it all. There is no denying, though, that this got dark as the story went on, and it evolved into something that I never saw coming. I was surprised, but in a good way. I really like when my fantasy stories delve into a darker, grittier side of things and don't compromise on that or sacrifice it for the sake of a happy ending. If a book is promising me power struggles and fights and a bloody battle for dominance, then I want it to give me that. I don't want it to give me an easy out that comes along as if by magic. I don't know what that says about me, to be honest. I mean, I don't maybe I just want characters to suffer. The main thing that I took from this, though, is how much Kuang must love fantasy. It was there in her writing, from the way she wrote her fight scenes to the way she conveyed the setting, the development of the magic system, and the golden oldie tropes that she included. I mean, you could just feel it through the page. This is top tier stuff. It sits right up there with the likes of Abercrombie and Gwyn and Jackson Bennett for me. I mean, I really feel like Kuang took the very best things about traditional fantasy and just brought it a little bit up to date for a modern audience. So this series is from my list of 21 books that I want to read in 2021. And when I was building that list, I picked all 5-star predictions. And this one, it wasn't far off. I gave it a 4 out of 5. My only complaint with this one was the pacing. It felt slightly off. Things were going at a really nice steady pace that felt in keeping with the story right up until the final third, when everything seemed to happen at once. At times I was worried I was missing bits because it seemed like months were condensed into moments, and it was all a bit much. I mean, I almost got whiplash. It was happening that quickly. The thing is, I'm not sure why Kuang chose to do that, because I mean, this absolutely could have been an incredible standalone fantasy, and it would have made sense to pace it in that way if that had been the case. But there were definitely things throughout the later parts of the story that couldn't possibly have been resolved by the end of book 1. So it seemed clear that Kuang knew that this was going to be at least a 2-book series when she was writing this. So just seemed a little bit of a strange choice. Overall, though, this was nigh on perfect. Now, I really like to binge read fantasy series, especially so that I can stay lost in that world alongside those characters that I've gotten to know. Plus, my memory is... what was I saying? You get it. So I have been carrying on with the series ever since finishing the first book, and as it happens, I've already finished book 2, The Dragon Republic. I was about 75% of the way through it by the end of the month, so I've managed to finish it within the first couple of days of August, and I am, as we speak, around about 40% of the way into book 3. I am so excited to see where this series goes and how it all concludes. I hear it's brutal. Moving on to thrillers, and this is The Push by Ashley Audrain. This is a domestic thriller which centres around a mother-daughter relationship, and it throws a light on some really heavy issues, including things like postnatal depression, which is also known as PND, and childhood trauma. So Blythe had a really difficult relationship with her mum growing up, so when she herself became a mother, she took an awful lot of baggage into that with her. She struggles to bond with her own baby, and she starts to question whether her child is evil. But is she, or is Blythe projecting her demons onto her innocent kid? Now, when a life-changing event happens, Blythe suspects the very, very worst of her daughter, but nobody else seems to see it. Blythe doesn't know what to believe, and for the space of this entire book, I didn't know either. My mind flipped from believing one thing to the other at the drop of a hat, and every time that happened, I was just so utterly convinced. I liked that it dug deep into not just Blythe's past, but that of her mother and her grandmother too, and how it explored the impact of this legacy of strained female familial relationships. Try saying that 5 times fast. I think Audrain did a decent job of exploring and articulating some hugely emotive topics in this one, whilst also giving quite a realistic and insightful portrayal of what it's like to become a parent. And in my opinion, this book represented the issues of mental health and motherhood in a way that really felt authentic. The format was also fairly refreshing. It's told primarily from Blythe's perspective in a letter that she's written to her husband, which explains everything that's happened from her perspective up to the point when we meet them. And the chapters are like little vignettes, so that keeps it moving along at quite a clip, but trust me when I say that that plot is going to keep you turning those pages anyway. This one touches on some traumatic things, so please do look into content warnings before you pick it up. I will go ahead and put a list of the ones that I noted in the description box down below for you. But yeah, please do look into them. This one had me in tears at points, and I had to put it down a couple of times. I just couldn't. This one was intense, it was impressive, and it was intriguing. It was well worth the read. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars in the end. I mean, it probably deserved higher, but there were times where my nerves were just so taut and it felt like a punishment keep reading it at those points. Maybe that just makes it all the more impressive, I don't know, but I couldn't quite hit 5 stars when I went to put my rating in on Goodreads. It just didn't feel like quite the right outcome for my experience. A solid 4 though, and easily one of the best thrillers I've picked up this year. So moving on, and this is where my very carefully laid plans to split my wrap-ups up into genre all fall apart, because frankly I have no idea how to categorise this next book. I've looked online and that was no real help either. Some places were calling it magical realism, others were saying it was just straight up poetry, and some were going for lit fit. So I've just gone for fiction. Because as we all know, I'm the authority on these things, obviously. The book I'm talking about is Mrs. Death by Salena Godden. This felt like an experiment in writing, mixing poetry with like a more traditional narrative. It even threw in like some script pages with like dialogue and stage directions. It was weird, but kind of good. Look, I'm a level with you. I am no genius, which is shocking, I know. I'm not a poet, I'm not a literature grad. I am just an average Joe who likes to read. And that's great for the record. So there is a distinct possibility that a lot of this book went way over my head, and that I just didn't appreciate it as much as it deserved. Ultimately, I left this book thinking that I kind of loved and kind of hated it, but knowing that I definitely didn't get all of it. This book is interesting though, I've got to say that for it. And it draws from real world experiences and events that might otherwise go overlooked, but which absolutely deserve to be recognised. The story follows Wolf, a young man who aspires to be an established writer. He suffered a tragedy at the age of 9 when his mother died in a tower block fire that echoed Grenfell. For anyone who doesn't know, Grenfell is a tower block in West London which burnt down in 2017 after an electrical fire inside one of the flats there got out of control and spread to the cladding on the outside of the building, which it turned out was highly flammable. The fire killed 72 people and it injured 70 more, and it left hundreds of people homeless. There have been a lot of questions in the years since as to whether or not the bottom line was put above tenants' safety, and inquiries into all of that are still ongoing. There is even the possibility that criminal charges will still be brought. And it's with this backdrop that Godden takes us on a journey with Wolf and Mrs. Death, who he met that night when she came to claim all of the many victims, including his mum. It's unclear if Mrs. Death is real or if she is a manifestation of Wolf's grief, but either way she is tired and she is fed up. As she and Wolf become close, she begins to tell him the stories of her many experiences, and he decides to write them down, becoming her unofficial biographer. Godden is a Londoner and she seems to draw from her experiences there quite a lot. Now, I don't know if my accent gives me away a bit. I've been gone from there a very long time, but I grew up in South London, and there is something kind of special about growing up there. It's probably not special at all. It's just this weird sense of pride we all have, which is probably wildly misplaced. But you could sort of feel that from Godden. I don't know if it takes one to know one or what, but I could sense that there was quite a bit of pride and that she was drawing from London itself in the inspiration for a lot of this story. It felt at points like this was a bit of a love letter to the city. Mrs. Death is an older, homeless black woman, and Godden goes on to explain that of course Death is a woman. What else? Woman is responsible for bearing life, so why wouldn't she be responsible for bearing death? And I loved this concept. But also, as an older, black and destitute woman, Mrs. Death is the most invisible person in all of the world, and the social commentary in this is profound, to say the least. Godden is a well-established spoken word poet, and she actually has a YouTube channel of her own, which I will go ahead and link in the description box down below. Definitely recommend going and checking it out if you get a chance. She is electric to watch. She often deals with issues such as working class poverty, women's rights and double standards in her work, and it's really, really impactful. And my main gripe with this one was that I felt like it should have been spoken word. It didn't feel like a novel was quite the right fit for it, and I was longing for that performance factor, that vitality that I knew Godden could have brought to it if she'd only chosen a different format for it, something like a podcast or a live performance or a radio play. The story is interesting, but it lost its way at points too, and I wish I could have had more confidence in it. In the end, I landed on a 3-star rating for this one. Now, typically when I can't settle on a rating, which is quite often because I'm really indecisive, I tend to go straight down the middle, 2.5. But this one felt like it deserved a bit more than that, and it was very, very easy to see how in another person's hands this could have been a 5-star book and beyond. It just, not for me, I guess. I'm going to stick with this general term of fiction for this next one too, which lies somewhere in the intersection of a historical fiction, a mystery and a domestic drama. Now, this one had bags of potential, but it ultimately missed the mark for me. This is The Lost Apothecary by Sarah Penner, and it has been making its way around the booknet ever since its release in March. Now, I had heard nothing but good things about it, so I definitely seem to be in the minority here. Awkward. This is a dual timeline novel set in London, following Nella, an apothecary in the 18th century, and Caroline, who is running away from her problems in the present day. Now, the two storylines are nicely interwoven throughout, which can be really tricky, so credit where it's due. Nella has been betrayed in the worst way imaginable by the man that she loves, and in her grief, she vows to help other women seek vengeance against the men that have wronged them. Nella tarnishes the memory of her mother's apothecary shop, which was once renowned for its restorative cures, by using it as a base to make her poisons, which she then sells on to desperate women. But one particular job might just be the death of her. Centuries later, and Caroline is in London trying to escape the hurt that her husband has caused by playing away. In a bid to keep herself distracted, she impulsively joins in with a scavenge hunt along the banks of the Thames and comes across a really curious old vial. Instead of retreating to her hotel bed with chocolate and a plan to insta-stalk her husband's mistress like we all would, Caroline seizes the opportunity to learn more about this vial and the long-lost apothecary shop that it once came from. The story itself had so much potential, but here it comes. I found the writing a bit amateurish, and I couldn't help but feel that this could have been much better realised in a more experienced pair of hands. Must have had some salt in my tea today. It just felt really clumsy and clunky at points. The atmosphere was good though, and the author did make some really solid choices. Only some, mind. There were more than a couple of things that felt off in this one, including things like a 12-year-old character who was just unrealistically mature. I mean, I know people grew up quick back in the 1700s and all that, but like this just took the biscuit. And there were a few glaring inconsistencies in the plotline and things that just felt wildly unbelievable, to be honest. It all just served to undermine the potential that this had, and I was so disappointed. I also wasn't particularly mad about the way that it suggested that you could only have a baby or a master's degree. Like, it even went so far as to directly compare the 9 months it takes to complete a master's program with the 9 months it takes to grow a baby. And, yeah. Content warnings for this one include a marriage breakdown, baby loss, and trouble conceiving, so just be aware of that. In the end, I give this one 2 out of 5. Rounded off July's reads with comic books and graphic novels, just like last time, and I would like to welcome you all back to another episode of Suzy Loves the Rat Queens. This month I picked up Rat Queens Volume 2 and Volume 3. And special shout out to Andy, who got me both of these as a surprise. He, being the supportive husband that he is, watched my June wrap up and saw how much I'd enjoyed Volume 1. And then he went ahead and picked these 2 up for me as well. And they arrived just in time for when I was having a really bad day. I think Rosa had not stopped screaming at me for about 12 hours straight, being a toddler, tantruming all over the place. It was a tough day, and honestly it cheered me up no end, so he's a keeper, isn't he? In case you missed me talking about how and why I loved Rat Queens Volume 1 so much, I will go ahead and link my June wrap up for you in the description box down below. Let's dive straight into Volume 2, and this picks up right where Volume 1 left off, with the Rat Queens waking up the morning after the night before. The main storyline in this one involves Dee's god. Now, she has been questioning her faith for quite some time now, but she is suddenly confronted by living proof of her god's existence in the form of an attack on the town. Dee must then take some extraordinary steps to try and stop the attack and save the town's citizens. Whilst Dee is trying to save the day in the midst of a religious crisis, Hannah is doing some soul searching of her own, trying to figure out whether what she's feeling is love or just a really bad hangover. Volume 2 gives us more info on the individual queens' backstories, excluding Betty, oddly, but the main focus is very firmly on Dee. I loved getting to know her character more. She's far more complex than first impressions might suggest, although, to be fair, they were really limited. You just didn't see quite as much of her in Volume 1. I do wish there had been more from Betty in this one. Of course, she's my fave, but and I did feel as well that Violet's backstory, although it was there, it could have gone a little bit deeper. It bordered on bland. What I love most about this series is the dynamic between the queens, and it was lacking a little bit in this, but it was a worthy sacrifice in the name of greater context and for a storyline that it upped its game massively from Volume 1. The plot lines in this, they seem to be getting bigger and bigger, and I mean, I'm all about that. It matched the same levels of action and intrigue in this one as what we saw in Volume 1. So not everything was sacrificed in order to make way for these backstories, which I thought was brilliant. I was a bit worried it was going to lose too much of itself otherwise, but it didn't do that. So no need to fear. And just like last time, I thought there was a really good balance between the two. Now, this one didn't feel quite as exciting as Volume 1 despite higher stakes, but the trade-off was worth it. I really did want to know more about the individual queens and their backstories, So I gave Rat Queens Volume 2 4 out of 5 stars. And finally I picked up Volume 3, and I had a lot of the same really great feelings about this one as well. I enjoyed it so much. A notable change in this one though is that there was a new artist at the helm for Volume 3. Tess Fowler took over the reins, and although there is quite a notable change in the art style, which I personally didn't enjoy quite as much, I could see that there was a lot of effort made to keep that consistency across the board, and I really appreciated that. The USP of this series, though, is the strength of its characters, and they were unchanged, so this was always going to be somewhat of a success for me no matter what. Volume 3 went one step further, up in its game in terms of the storyline, going deeper and darker than Rat Queens ever had before. Now, the plotline itself is the best one yet, but there were a few issues with the storytelling. I just wasn't getting enough info at points, and the text just felt too condensed. It felt as if they had missed out a couple of quite important points along the way, and it became a bit frustrating. But it wasn't all that bad, and it did make sense overall. This one sets its sights on Hannah and throws back to her uni days as she and the Queens try and help her dad out of a treasonous spot. There has been a recent student uprising at Mage University, which has since been labelled as an attempted coup, and Hannah's dad has been implicated as inciting the unrest. He has been arrested and thrown into an otherworldly prison, so Hannah goes to try and get to the bottom of what's happening and to try and save him. And being the best mates that they are, the Queens readily back her up. This one was much braver in its storyline, and you could feel that it had been building up to this throughout volumes 1 and 2. It was as if we had decided that he was suddenly ready and had the confidence to give this storyline a go. This wasn't perfectly executed, but I really did like it. It felt like no guts, no glory at times. Plus those little humorous moments that make this series what it is, they were much more prevalent in this one, and it made me realise that I'd been missing that in volume 2. I gave this one a 4 out of 5, and I also really loved the story about Braga in the back. Now, Braga is one of the supporting characters. She is an orc warrior who would have been a chieftain, except for the fact that she fundamentally disagreed with her dad's politics. She's also openly transgender and a total fucking badass, and she's just amazing. So there we have it. That's my July wrap-up. Not the best month in terms of the number of books read, but I definitely had one of the highest rated months so far this year. Mostly 4 stars. Like, I can't complain. So maybe it was quality over quantity this month. I mean, like, let's go with that. Let me know if you've read any of these books, what you thought of them, if any of them are on your TBR. I would genuinely love to know. Something I'd really like to do more of is getting chatting with you guys in the comments about the books that we've read or loved. So please do go ahead and jump in there and tell me. Don't forget to hit like if you liked it and to subscribe so you don't miss a thing. The next video due to go up on my channel is my August TBR, and there are some banging books on that one. So yeah, you don't want to miss it. Thank you as ever for watching. I'll see you again soon. Bye! Did I actually make it through an entire video without mentioning Master of Gym? Raised in relative poverty? It's not right, is it? No. The relationship between Ring? It's like their relationship name, you know, like Milliam on Love Island. Classic. Whoever came up with that's genius. That actually helped in that regard. Actually? Oh, I just bit my cheek as I said that. Ow. It's female familial relationships. This is, and oh, I'm gonna sneeze again. Is that the right way around? Yeah. Why are the words so hard today? That is so distracting.
Rat Queen. Oh, is that still recording?
Yeah.
Oh.